This podcast is being recorded on Wadawurrung land. We pay our respect to the traditional custodians of this country, elders past and present. We extend that respect to any First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Welcome back to the Jade Walker Way. Today on the podcast, I'm so excited to welcome Nour Abuloghod. She is an incredible Melbourne-based naturopath with a keen focus on endometriosis. She has over 12 years of experience consulting via telehealth, and her career actually first began with a passion for exploring psychology before she then discovered her true calling in naturopathy. Over the years, she's developed a strong focus in women's health, particularly PCOS and endometriosis, which led her to complete a master's in women's health medicine through the University of New South Wales. In her final trimester, she took on a research project exploring the role of diet in endometriosis, and this is exactly what we're diving deep into in this episode. So a few things that we cover in this conversation include how she became drawn to working with endo PCOS and supporting those often dismissed by the medical system, her master's research exploring how diet's influence on the microbiome, inflammation, estrogen, and dietary strategies can all interplay with endo, why stress, antibiotics, and environmental exposures may disrupt the microbiome and worsen endo, how histamine, mast cell activation, and estrogen interact in this complex condition. Definitely take note of this one because this one is quite compelling. What the research says about the Mediterranean, anti-inflammatory, low FODMAP, gluten-free and high-fibre diets, a powerful case study showing how simple dietary shifts dramatically improve IBS and endo symptoms, and of course, so much more. This episode is absolutely packed with insight, and I guarantee it's one you'll want to share with your friends, family, or clients who need to hear it. So let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Nour.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jade, for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you on. We've been talking now for probably about a year, and it's been in my mind to have you on. So I'm so excited we're finally here.
Yeah, I am too. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. So before we get into today's very interesting topic around how diet can impact endometriosis, I thought we'd take it back to the start and first focus on you as a naturopath. What made you get into naturopathy?
So I'm going to take you back a little. Growing up, a lot younger, I've always been extremely passionate about helping people. I think it's always something that I've wanted to do for such a long time. I remember myself reading, while everyone was reading Ghostbusters, I was reading a lot of motivational books and personal development books and things like that. And felt like psychology was where I wanted to be and something that I wanted to do. Years later, so this is when I ended up enrolling in psychology, my dad handed me over a book by a practitioner. He's an integrative medicine practitioner. His name is Dr. Andrew Whale, and it was a book called Spontaneous Healing. And I remember I was so into it. I think it took me just a couple of days to a week to finish the entire thing. And after reading that book, I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. But obviously, because for such a long time, I've been wanting psychology. It was such a confusing moment. So at one point, I was actually doing psychology full time and naturopathy on the weekend. And I did that for about a couple of weeks until I realized that my heart was just set on naturopathy, very passionate about it. And we do counseling as part of course, you know that. And so that was it. It was naturopathy from there.
Oh, that's amazing. And I love that was actually such a strong influence on your life quite early on.
Yeah, I love reading all sorts of books, but just never came across anything natural medicine. So I guess meant to be, yeah. And it was interesting. My dad handed me that book in Arabic. So it had a different translation. And I remember going and borrowing it in English. And I was just so in love with natural medicine.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And it certainly shows.
Yeah.
And you've now been in practice for about 12 years, is that right?
Yeah, over 12 years. So I graduated from Melbourne, the Endeavour College of Natural Medicine.
Yeah, amazing. Endeavour alumni represent.
Yeah, yeah. It was such a beautiful experience.
And what made you passionate about endometriosis specifically?
To be honest, I think so. I used to see a lot of PCOS patients, polycystic ovarian. But I started to see a rise in endometriosis. And this is where I started to delve into and read a lot more about and educate myself more on. I think what really triggered it for me, to be honest, was the amount of young girls that I had seen that were put on the pill, completely dismissed their symptoms for heavy bleeds and extremely painful bleeds. And I always felt like there was something more that I needed to do. And yeah, it was just really looking more into endometriosis. And from there, that whole passion started.
Amazing. And it's such an area that needs more passionate practitioners. And even just one of the posts that I posted on Instagram a couple of days ago had two endosurgeons comment on it in appreciation for the post. And they were talking about how they're such a fan of this multidisciplinary approach and how they refer to people like naturopaths and things. And I think we're really starting to see that real multidisciplinary approach become the norm and see how we can all fit in around each other and support each other in different ways.
I would love to see that happening, honestly. And this is where I'm reaching out to a lot of at the moment just to try and collaborate in that sense, where I do think that we need that integrated approach for sure. I think education is key as well. So one of the things that I'm embarking on this year is trying to educate a lot of young girls in schools on what's considered a healthy period and what's not. And I feel like this is where we need to start, and they need to understand that the pill is not the only answer. So we'll see how that goes.
That's amazing. And from what I hear, it sounds like schools are really receptive to that. They want people to come in and help educate.
Yeah, I started reaching out, so we'll see how it goes.
That's amazing. So you then went on to do your master's degree and then had a further research opportunity, which is what excites me. So tell me more about this and how that came about.
Yeah, so again, I think I just had a bit more of that drive to wanting to learn because I specialize in women's health. I thought, you know what, I just want to delve further into it. And I came across the Masters of Women's Health Medicine in the UNSW. So a great uni. It was fully online. And that's where I started to study the women's health. But it was not until the last trimester where I came across it's an optional research unit. And I felt like this is probably the best opportunity for me to research something that I'm really passionate about. And thankfully, I was very lucky enough to have found endometriosis, but in particular the role of the microbiome. So yeah, we did that together and we ended up publishing. So after I graduated, we ended up publishing about a year or so later. So it did take us some time, but eventually we got there and we had the help of Stephanie Balakas as well to do that.
Amazing. And yeah, this is a master's degree I've had my eyes on for many years.
Really?
Yeah, either that or the reproductive medicine one, being a single mum and everything. I'm always like, I just don't know how I would do it. But how did you find the workload?
So honestly, Jade, I think you can always take it to what you're comfortable with. It is fully online, which is great because I've got 3 children. I was also working part-time. I won't lie, there were moments of very high stress levels, I think especially with the research. But the great thing is that you can take it at your own pace. So you don't really need to take up so many or X amount of units at one time.
That's really good. That is definitely reassuring.
Yeah. And even if it takes you whatever X amount of years to do it, then absolutely go for it. Yeah.
Something I sometimes hear from people, and I'd love to know your take on this, is because I've spoken to quite a few people who've done the UNSW Masters of Women's Health, and some people say there was a lot of stuff that you learn, that you study, that you already know, but it's about getting that master's degree. Did you feel like there was a lot in there that you also didn't know or enhanced your learning?
Yeah, for sure. I think especially when you were able to do certain researchers, like many researchers throughout on your own, in some cases you get to choose particular topics, which if you're passionate about particular topics, I remember also looking further into PCOS, for example, but definitely a lot of things that we already know and probably a lot of things that don't necessarily resonate with us or we agree with in terms of particular approaches. I wouldn't say that it is very medicine forward. Let's just put it at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have both worlds and you can always kind of steer it the way you would like.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. And especially, I suppose, as well, if you want to go down the line of, say, PhD eventually and things like that.
That's it for me.
Yeah.
I've developed enough white hairs, I think, in the past. I'm good for now. I'm happy to do another research, but yeah, not sure about the PhD yet.
Yeah, totally fair enough, especially with 3 kids as well. So let's dive into the research paper that you worked on, which is an incredible article. I'll put the link in the show notes for people to go check it out. But even just if people want a quick summary, in table 1, there's a list of all the different dietary interventions that have been studied and what the key outcomes were. I think that's such a useful tool for people looking at the best dietary interventions. So tell us about...
also, like the nutrient table as well.
Yes, and the nutrients table, 100%. So tell us about this study. It was titled Dietary and Nutritional Interventions for the Management of Endometriosis. So tell me all about it.
Yeah, I'll give you in a nutshell. What we did was we delved into predominantly the key players that are involved in the pathogenesis of endometriosis, namely inflammation, which is part of the immune system. We looked at mast cells. We looked at estrogen, which is a big driver for endometriosis, oxidative stress as well. We did delve slightly into epigenetics, the microbiome, and then we explored how diet and nutrition can actually influence these processes. And, obviously we looked into the current research on those dietary interventions for managing endometriosis. So that's what we did in a nutshell. And that's,
amazing.
Point. Mm-hmm.
And even that summary right there shows how much amazing information is in this study. So let's break that down now into some of those key categories. First, let's start off with a very hot topic. What did you find out about the microbiome with endometriosis?
Yeah, definitely a hot topic. And it is definitely one that's emerging. So we did find that patients with endometriosis, they had more pathogenic species in their oral, vaginal, stool, and even cervical microbiome. So just to name a few, we found that there was presence of Escherichia, Enterococcus, Pseudomonas, and they were notably higher in the vaginal microbiota. But then there was also Fusobacterium, which is a sick pathogen, and that was found also in the oral samples of women with mild to severe endometriosis. And the gut microbiome, we know is capable of metabolizing circulating estrogens, and an imbalance in that microbiota leads to an increased level of estrogen metabolites. And we know that estrogen also increases inflammation. This is where I guess diet is really important in balancing the microbiome. So focusing on the diet is really essential. Yeah,
absolutely. And did you find, because obviously you would have gone through all of these studies in much more detail, did you find that there were also a lot of correlative rather than causative factors as well? Say, for example, considering that maybe it's that people with endometriosis have been more likely to have interventions that impact their gut microbiome, say antibiotics or taking lots of NSAIDs and things like that, and that could be also the reason for disruption in the microbes?
To be honest, I haven't, when we studied that, we didn't really, something that I stumbled upon. I do know that is probably a very high likelihood as to why there might be an imbalance in the microbiome, but also in, as you mentioned, antibiotics, and then stress is another factor, something that we didn't really look at, but could alter the microbiome as well. Things like, I don't know, hand sanitizers or what we put in our bodies and mouth can disrupt the microbiome. So there's a whole heap of out there where we can investigate further and look as to why the microbiome might be imbalanced. But as you mentioned, they are very valid points.
That's such a good point about the stress. Like, I think we constantly come back to how much of an impact stress has on every system in the body, really, and especially the microbiome. Such a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a big driver for endometriosis too. Again, we never delved into it, but it is definitely something that I've seen in clinic quite a bit. And the number one thing that I will address is always stress. if it's present. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even though we're not going to get into this whole detail today, it really does
Yeah.
just come back to why it's so important to consider that even if there's like a genetic component, it's also, and even if say the stem cells were there from embryonic development, it's the things that happen in our life that can also trigger off those events and exacerbate them. And
It's epigenetic.
yeah,
Epigenetic, what it is. Yes. Just because you may have a gene, don't necessarily need to switch on that gene. We can switch it up with diet, lifestyle for sure.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Now,
Yeah.
another topic that is super hot at the moment is all
Yeah.
around histamine and mast cell activation syndrome, which we love because
Yeah.
I feel like us
Yeah.
naturopaths have been talking about histamine for a very long time.
I know there's always a hype around histamine and mast cells. And I think that was one of the things early on that I really wanted to focus on. But yeah, chronic inflammation over time can lead to mast cell activation. And because I'm going to try and simplify it, mast cells release prostaglandins, and these are hormone-like substances that affect several bodily functions, including inflammation, pain, and even uterine contractions. And then things like histamine and other pro-inflammatory molecules that can lead to edema, resulting in visceral pain. But what we found really interesting actually was that the high number of activated mast cells appeared to be found near endometriotic lesions close to the nerve fibers, and this might contribute directly to pain associated with endometriosis. And things like estrogen can promote mast cell activation, resulting in inflammation. Interestingly, on the topic of mast cells, they appear to be located near nerve endings in both pelvic and abdominal regions, as well as bowel mucosa. So, we might correlate that, or one of the explanations between endo and IBS as well could potentially be that mast cell.
That is such a pertinent point that you've just made there. And I think that so many people are going to find this really change the way that they think about addressing their clients with endometriosis.
Absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm just jumping in quickly to tell you all about the Endo Care Collective, my signature online program designed to help you reclaim your body, reduce your symptoms, and feel truly supported on your endometriosis journey. Inside the Endo Care Collective, you'll get access to expert guidance from me, evidence-based strategies, and a supportive community of people who actually get what you're going through. You'll literally be able to chat with people inside a WhatsApp group chat, or we've got the Facebook group as well. We cover everything from gut health to hormones, pain management, and lifestyle tools, so you're not left piecing it together on your own. You'll even get access to practitioner-only prescriptions because you do become my client through this very unique way. If you're ready to take the guesswork out of managing your endo and start feeling more like you again, just Google Endo Care Collective Jade. You'll find it that way, or you can find the direct link in the show notes or my link in bio, Instagram, or my website, jadewalker.com.au. All right, back to the episode.
Yeah. And I think it should, because there is a lot of research. So I'm just giving a brief, but if you look at the paper, there's quite a bit and quite a lot of research on that.
Yeah. Amazing. And this actually flows quite well into the next question around how estrogen plays a role in endo, but there is that overlay with estrogen and histamine as well.
Yes, the endometriosis, it is a hormone-dependent condition, and estrogen does play a major role in its pathogen, as well as obviously pain and inflammation. So we know that an environment that's higher in estrogen might be associated with the severity of the pain, but it also, again, as mentioned, does promote mast cell activation and therefore inflammation, and therefore leading to pain. So where there's inflammation, there's always pain. And estrogen also stimulates. There's a lot that we need to definitely look into, and we can definitely take back the role and importance of diet and nutrients in how we manage all of this.
And it seems to be such a double whammy, because obviously our own endogenous or even exogenous estrogen can impact endometrial lesions. However, endometriosis lesions make their own estrogen themselves as well. So they're very clever.
Yeah, and then there's a progesterone resistance, and we can talk all day about the role of hormones, but it is something that, again, shouldn't really be overlooked.
100%. Okay, so with all of this said around the microbiome, the histamine and the estrogen, what were the key features of the dietary interventions that you found are the best for endo? What works, what doesn't?
Yeah, Jade, as naturopathic practitioners, we know that there's not one set diet. That is a very personalized approach. But we know and research showed that diet plays a important role in the treatment management and even prevention of endometriosis. And so some studies show that it can positively influence pain perception in women with endometriosis. So we looked at a couple of diets. One of them is the high FODMAP diet, and that's been shown to increase inflammation and mast cell activation, increasing prostaglandins and leading to pain. Whereas with a low FODMAP diet, that's been shown to have significant improvement in gut symptoms in patients with endometriosis. Patients with endometriosis are actually 2 to 3 times more likely to have IBS. And so being on a FODMAP diet sometimes suitable for those patients who do have IBS-like symptoms. The other one that we looked at was the high fiber diet. So we know that this increases the microbiome diversity, which leads to downregulation of mast cells and inflammation metabolism. So that's another one to consider. A red meat. So we know that this increases inflammation as well as estrogen in the blood, increasing pain. And in fact, there was a study that was done that showed that women who consumed more than 2 servings of meat per day were actually at high risk of endometriosis by at least 56%. So again, something to consider. Dairy was another one, another extremely controversial hot topic. Now, whilst there was a lot of research on improvement of endometriosis with the consumption of dairy, we know that dairy can increase serum estrogen activating mast cells, and therefore it could potentially worsen pain-related symptoms. So it was released in 2024, and this showed that adhering to the alternative healthy eating index, which involved consuming more fruits and vegetables and lower red meat and trans fats, was actually associated with a 13% lower risk of endometriosis diagnosis. So that was an interesting one. We felt the need to include that in the paper. Another one was the gluten-free diet. Again, another hot topic, but we found that the gliadin protein in the wheat actually increases mast cells, stimulating an inflammatory response. And the removal of wheat gluten, that showed an improvement in pain. But in one study, when wheat was reintroduced, symptoms such as pain, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, headaches, and fatigue, they recovered. So again, it's probably a very case-by-case one. It's not something that, okay, everyone needs to go on a gluten-free diet. It's certainly not one that I put patients on in clinic. But if they do show some sensitivity, then it is worthwhile just eliminating for a few weeks to see whether or not there's a difference. So there was also another large-scale Japanese study that we looked at. So it was looking at the anti-inflammatory diet, specifically in pregnant women. With women who have endometriosis that fall pregnant, they are actually at a higher risk of things like preeclampsia, low birth weight babies, and risk of preterm. So with this particular study, they had women pre-pregnancy on an anti-inflammatory diet, and interestingly, there was a significant reduction in preterm births and low birth weight babies and preeclampsia as well. Whereas we know that, on the other hand, a high or a pro-inflammatory diet that includes things like high intakes of sugar and highly processed foods, trans fats, they were actually 4 times more likely to have endometriosis, one that I find a lot easier to implement and there's a lot more compliance, both that and the Mediterranean diet. So they're both very rich in antioxidants, they're both very high omega-3, they help with the microbiome diversity, and it's a lot easier to implement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
do you think with the statistic, with the 4 times more likely to have endo, do you think, I always wonder with those kind of statistics, could it be that those people that have the pro-inflammatory diets are more likely to be diagnosed with endo because of the pro-inflammatory environment they're having more pain, more symptoms, therefore they're more likely to present and be diagnosed? Whereas there could be, this is just me hypothesizing, some people who are asymptomatic who don't have endo, they might have the stem cells there or something, but because they've got such an anti-inflammatory diet, antioxidant rich and things like that, they don't develop the full systemic inflammatory condition of endometriosis? Do you think there can be that?
Possibly, yeah. And then there's, again, the epigenetics. So absolutely, I do think that it is a number of different things, honestly. So obviously these are like just a couple of research here or there, but you don't really know, I guess, at the end of the day, whether or not they've looked at all the things that we as naturopaths question and look at and delve
Yeah,
into.
exactly. I feel like the longer I've been out in
Mm.
the practicing field and the more research you're looking at, the more critical you get of research. And you're like, but did they consider this? Did
Yeah.
they consider that?
Yeah, of course. Honestly, this was me all along.
I bet.
Doing the research, and it
Mm.
was just trying to dissect everything and trying to make a connection. But it's interesting. There is a lot of research out there, and it's very difficult to, pinpoint just one thing. But if you have a look at the paper, you will see as well that we still need more large scale studies. And I don't feel like there is that many, unfortunately, around, especially around diet. So it would be nice to see some solid and more recent ones coming out. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like we will eventually, like with all the new awareness and more
Yes.
funding and things. But having been
Huge.
involved a little bit in the understanding of research with my work with Hey Sister, and we ran a double-blind placebo-controlled trial looking at caprogesic on women with dysmenorrhea, and the time and money it takes just to do an
Yeah.
RCT on 90 people is out
I
of
can
this world.
imagine. I can imagine. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is a lot of hard work for sure.
Yeah. And I wanted to circle back to the low FODMAP diet because obviously, yeah, that is probably one of the most common therapeutic diets that get mentioned in the endo community. But given that it's only meant to be a short-term measure, and of course, if they come see a naturopath, we're going to do all the underlying work. But for those people listening that might not see a naturopath, what do you suggest that people do, just all those considerations when doing a low FODMAP, given that they don't want to be on it long term?
To be honest, I don't think that this is a particular diet that they should enter. You need to be doing a lot of repair work. And if you're not doing that, then you're not going to see results when you come back and you start consuming all these high FODMAP foods anyways. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done where there is an elimination diet that's involved. So if I would probably suggest, if anyone wants to do any dietary modifications, probably start off with either the Mediterranean or the anti-inflammatory, because I feel like it's a healthier way of eating. Obviously, if you do have IBS-like symptoms, a lot of the times women know what foods they react to, but I do think that it is definitely one that they should see a health practitioner for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. That's very solid advice. I also thought it was such an amazing point you made about the gliadin protein found in wheat that can increase the mast cells.
It's very interesting. Yeah. Again, this is how we took the diet and nutrients back to the pathogenesis. But again, the gluten-free diet, it can be very restrictive, can be very costly, it can be very stressful. For some people, bread is everything, and cutting it out is, you don't just want to do it for the sake of doing it. I feel like even if you're slightly sensitive, maybe that's where we will look at eliminating gluten. But again, as mentioned previously, you need to do some gut in the process. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I wanted to circle back to as well was obviously when we're talking about a gluten-free diet or reducing out processed carbohydrates and things, but I also find that there are some times where we have to be culturally sensitive because some people's diets are so high in bread and things like that. How do you work around that with patients that may have a diet that has a lot of bread in it already?
Yes. Yeah. So I think the best approach, and this is something I tell my patients all the time, before we remove anything, you need to have a meal plan in place. If you want to do, let's just say if it's bread, for example, you need to have all the ingredients that are right. If you want to go on a gluten-free diet to be able to make your bread at home, or you need to have the right clean, healthy source of a gluten-free bread, for example, that you're able to get easily without feeling so overwhelmed. Because when you feel overwhelmed by a particular diet, you're more likely to actually give up very easily. And so having a meal plan in place, writing all the ingredients that you need, shopping accordingly, so that way, your mindset, you're set right for this challenge. Because unfortunately, it can be very challenging, especially as you mentioned, when there are lots of cultures that have a lot of bread in their diet, and it can be extremely frustrating to remove all the things that they love. But I like to explain that, especially if you're gluten sensitive, you can actually reintroduce it, but we just need to work a little bit on the health of your gut.
Yeah, such a good point. I always honestly think ever since I've learnt more Palestinian recipes and having been to
Oh,
your
yeah.
house and eaten your incredible food for last year's Ramadan, the breaking of the
Ramadan
fast.
iftar, yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I was like, more people need to eat Palestinian food. There's just so many
Yeah.
beautiful, just a
Yeah,
beautiful
thank you.
appreciation for an array of vegetables and legumes and
Yeah.
extra virgin olive oil and the herbs and spices. Like, it's
Yeah.
the food. It's some of the best food I've eaten, honestly.
Thank you. Yeah, you're definitely coming over again.
Oh,
You're
yes.
more than welcome. Thank you. Yeah, we do also use a lot of bread as well.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking, like given that especially
Yeah.
in Palestinian, Lebanese, all those kinds of cuisine where
Yeah.
there's a lot
The
of
Middle Eastern.
flatbread and
Yeah, it can be challenging.
so if you were to conclude, if you were to summarize it, because obviously we know everyone is different and everyone
Yeah,
should be under the guidance of a
absolutely.
practitioner if they can. However, if there was the one key way of eating that you feel people should follow more, what would it be?
Honestly, as clean as possible. You want to stay away from things that are packaged, highly refined, going back to basics. I honestly love both the anti-inflammatory and the Mediterranean diet. So I think they're great because I just feel like it's a healthier way of eating, and this is how we should all be eating. One thing that I generally like to focus on, and I think my patients can probably very sick of hearing me say it all the time, but it's just veggies all the way. Please just include more veggies here or more veggies there. I like to see an array of different vegetables throughout the day because this, at the end of the day, is what's going to help with the formation of the microbiome, which is going to help with inflammation, which is going to help with the mast cells, the immune system, pretty much everything. So it is very important to delve into a diet that has a lot of vegetables. And I don't feel like everyone really meets that requirement still.
Oh, absolutely. Do you have any, just off the top of your head, any examples of case studies where people have just shifted their diet and it's made a profound outcome?
Yeah, I had a patient a few months ago. She was diagnosed with endometriosis, but since she had IBS prior to that for 10 years or so, she's had low iron levels since she was 16. Again, this is another thing that really triggers me. Just that constant iron deficiency that just never gets addressed. So there were lots of IBS-like symptoms, a lot of twisted pain, a lot of bloating, a lot of gas, flatulence, discomfort, pain overall. And she knew that she was very sensitive to gluten. So she felt that every time she would have gluten foods. I had her on the anti-inflammatory diet, keeping in mind that she's a mum with kids, she's got a job. I didn't want to put her on something so restrictive like the FODMAP diet, which can create a lot more stress for that individual. So we had her on the anti-inflammatory diet, dairy, gluten, and red meat. She was predominantly on things like lentils, legumes, nuts, seeds, fresh fish, chicken, eggs, all of that. I gave her some herbal teas just to sip throughout the day. Things like caraway, beautiful, especially when there's a lot of digestive complaints, sea, ginger, turmeric for the pain. And within a few weeks, there was a huge reduction in her symptoms overall. And mind you, she's had IBS-like symptoms for years that never ever managed adequately. And I did have her on some supplements as well. So we did a lot of gut support, and I love to always add a pre and probiotic as well. And yeah, I wasn't surprised, but she was very surprised with the results, which was very nice to see. Yeah. Only a few weeks. And I have to admit though, she was very compliant, which is great. Yeah.
That always helps a lot. And I fully understand when compliance is a challenge. I struggle to comply to a lot of things these days. But yeah, I can fully relate with that feeling when you're not surprised by someone's outcomes. It never gets old seeing the outcomes happen so quickly and just how they feel like it's been life-changing for them just to make these modifications.
Yeah, and there are small modifications and they can make a very big difference in how someone feels.
That's amazing. So if someone did want to work with you, where are you located and do you do online and in person or one or the other?
At the moment, I am completely online. So I do telehealth consultations to work and love working out of a clinic. That was all before COVID. So eventually I'd love to go back into clinic. But at the moment, I'm doing telehealth.
Yeah, amazing. I'll make sure that I put the links to find you in the show notes. But
Thank
it's
you.
been
Yeah.
an absolute pleasure having you on, Nour,
Thank
and to
you.
explore
You
the
too,
research.
Jade.
Thank
You
you.
too. Thank you. I really look forward to having you over as well for another iftar, Palestinian iftar.
Oh my gosh, I cannot wait. I'll make sure I don't eat anything for all day.
No, this time you can come in and cook with me as well. It would be
Oh,
nice
now that, yeah, I can't wait for that. I'll be setting up the tripod and we'll both have a mic on and we'll just film
It'll
us
be
cooking
fun.
together. It'll be amazing.
All
All
right.
right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Jade. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Jade Walker Way. If you enjoyed this conversation or if it got you thinking, I would love it if you could do me a quick favor to help grow this podcast and reach more people who need to hear it most. Just hit subscribe and leave me a 5-star review wherever you're listening. It honestly makes such a huge difference in helping this show land in the ears that need it. Thank you again for being here, and I can't wait to bring you more juicy, important conversations soon.